Okay. Okay, we're gonna get started. So welcome. Of .NET Conf. We did have one last year. The explanation behind the 2025, because I did have several people ask me confused about this, is every year Microsoft comes out with a new major .NET version. The latest one is 10. That came out in November, and they called it .NET Conf 2025. And they ask Microsoft people and MVPs to do their own local versions around the globe. And they say, hey, title it blah, 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 place .NET Conf 2025. People understand the 2025 .NET Conf. That is not what happened since I scheduled it in January. But that's why it's titled that. So let's get started. I will have this on the very last slide as well. I just like to put a QR code where you can find this entire presentation. Sometimes people like to take pictures of slides, so still feel free to do that if you want, but just know you're not gonna lose any information. It's all uploaded online on my site. I am Daniel Ward. I'm a software developer and consultant. I'm a Microsoft MVP in .NET. I'm the organizer of the San Antonio .NET user group, and I help organize the Austin one as well. And actually, if you ever join our remote sessions, we act as one group during those. So we kind of said, hey, let's start up both the San Antonio and the Austin side remotely. Let's meet together. If we ever have the problem of having too many people, that would be an awesome problem to have. But yeah.
Oh, we already started. Okay.
Yeah, well, you walked out and then 10 people came in, which I think was because of you. So thank you. Sponsors, basically who's paying for stuff. I didn't put them on here, but Geekdom, I mean, obviously we're in Geekdom space, so thank you, Geekdom. DevSA, I mean, they kind of did some advertising for us, got the word out a little bit, so thank you, DevSA. And Link Techniques, which is the company I work for, they are actually paying for the food, and afterwards, we're gonna go downstairs to the bar, and they'll pay for any drinks if you want those as well. So we do, we call them digital transformations. Kind of the tagline is we try to help make your software delivery into a competitive advantage, not a cost center. So sometimes that looks like we want to go to the cloud for the first time. We don't know how to do that. Now we get a lot of how we use AI. Sometimes it's, we just lost $2 million because we don't have any tests. Can you help us learn how to do testing? Sometimes it's product stuff. Just learn how to do the software better, basically. So, okay. Outline for this. We're going to go over basically not all the new stuff in .NET 10, but .NET, the actual .NET Conf is 3 days, and I think it's 12 hours a day of live stream. And obviously, I'm not going to attempt to do every single update in this. What I did was kind of go over all the release notes and try to condense all that stuff into what I think is the cool stuff, the more notable stuff, into about an hour. And this one might actually be a little shorter than an hour because we've kind of been calling this one the paper cuts release. There's not, compared to 8 and 9, there's not as much real cool updates in this, but there's a lot of little things that just make .NET better kind of across the board. So we'll go over .NET 10. This is not C# stuff. This is new libraries, new things in the framework itself. Then new actual language stuff in C#, new things in EF4. MAUI, WPF, and WinForms are kind of grouped in one section because there's not that much going on there. Same thing with AI and Visual Studio. Then we'll go over new stuff in ASP.NET Core that includes Blazor and some new Aspire stuff as well. Okay, so first section, .NET 10. If you are not familiar with how .NET 10 or with how .NET does its releases, every year Microsoft releases a new major .NET version. Even numbers are long-term support for 3 years. Odd numbers are short-term for 1 year. This last November was 10, which means it's an LTS release. So the support will not end until 2028, November. If you can spare the time, in my opinion, there's not really much reason to not upgrade your apps to the latest even number. And this is a big reason. So performance, at the end of this presentation, I'll show the performance page, basically to show you why I'm not going over all this stuff. Is because the scroll bar is this big. But Every year, Stephen Taub, this guy at Microsoft, makes a massive blog post, says, hey, here's all the new performance stuff in the new .NET. And he'll go and like, here's the changes we made in the framework, here's the assembly code differences that it made, and all these benchmarks. This is really easy to undersell because I can't possibly talk about all of it, but this is maybe like the biggest reason to upgrade on all .NET versions is just you get performance improvements like almost everywhere. I've seen tweets and like heard stories from people of like, I was on framework 4.7.8 and we upgraded to the most recent .NET and our app like literally runs twice as fast now with us basically doing nothing. Or like uses half the memory, things like that. So you can get a lot of gains literally just by upgrading and nothing else. A lot of times you don't even really have to do anything else aside from bump that version number up. Okay, so some new things in the framework. First one is a new kind of string comparison you can do called numerical string comparison. I don't know how this shows up on this TV. A little hard to see. If you can see this, you can say string compare.create, and you have a new option here in the compare options that says numeric ordering. So you are using strings here, but it's comparing them in a way that cares about numbers. So this first example, we're comparing the strings 02 and the string 2. And if you say, hey, are those equal? You get true because you're comparing by this numeric ordering. Similar, we have this list of the strings, Windows 11, Windows 10, and Windows 8. Normally, if you were to order these, it would go by the lexicographical way. So 8 is bigger than 1, which comes first. So you get a different ordering. Now it actually orders by the numbers in there, which you care about. So you get 8, 10, and 11 instead of 10, 11, 8, which is what you would get normally. And finally, this last example, we have this hash set with a single item in it, a string that's 007. And we're saying, hey, does this set contain these strings 7? And you actually get a true back from that because they're technically different strings. This string does not exist in the set, but we care about what the actual numerical values here are. So you get a true back from that. So that's kind of a useful little new tool we have. Some new things with parsing JSON. You can now, out of the box, disallow duplicate JSON properties. So this new, in your JSON serializer options, there's this new property, allow duplicate properties. It's true by default, but you can set it to false. And if you do, in the example here, we have this JSON where the value key is in here twice. So if we try to deserialize and get the value out of it, we get -1. And all these next 4 options will throw a JSON exception. So we're just trying to deserialize it into some different types here. And then we call JSON document.parse. All of those will say your JSON is not valid because we're not allowing duplicate properties. I'm kind of surprised this wasn't in the framework already because I don't think it's the norm, but I do think it's a fairly common use case. Kind of going along with this, there is a new set of options called strict that involves that and some other stuff that follows some best practices. So in addition to that no duplicate properties, all the members have to be accounted for. You can't have any unmapped things in the JSON to your type. The casing matters with this setting. You can't assign something null if it's not nullable. And if you have something in the constructor of your type that is required, it has to be in the JSON. So again, I don't think this is the most common use case, but I do think it is common enough that I'm kind of surprised it wasn't in the framework already. So I love these additions. I think they are great. Zip APIs. So I did not know this. I have never had to do anything with zips in .NET. Has anyone done? You have? So apparently, straight up just did not have async APIs for zip things. If you wanted to do stuff with zip, unzipping or creating a zip, you're going to have to block. That's just how it was. Well, now they have async APIs, so that's great. And just in general, they've improved the performance and memory usage of that stuff. So this is kind of the paper cuts things I was talking about. And here's another one, WebSocket stream. So has anyone done stuff with WebSockets in .NET? So currently, WebSockets is a little boilerplatey, a little ugly. You have to like load stuff into a byte buffer and like read it until it's done. And they've made that a little easier by abstracting that just into a normal stream object, which already existed in .NET. So as an example here, you say WebSocket stream.create readable message stream, and then we can just call a JSON serializer on that message stream to a type we want, and it'll work. So if you've done WebSocket stuff before, you know this probably would have been like 10 lines without this, something like that. So not adding any new functionality, but making things a lot easier to read, cleaner, more maintainable, nicer to work with. DNX. So this is a new CLI command that is very close to Node's npx. Is anyone very familiar with a Node as well? Node.js. So Node, they have npx that just allows you to like one-shot run a package, so you don't have to install it. It just runs it, then gets rid of all the stuff. And that's basically the equivalent of it. They call it DNX. So really the new CLI tool, the new CLI command is .NET tool exec. So as an example, .NET tool exec source, and then you give it this path. This tool is called .NET say, and it takes a string and it makes some ASCII art that's saying whatever string you give it. DNX is a shell script they include as well. That's just calling this under the hood because they said, that's kind of verbose and ugly. So if you want, you can use DNX as well. And this is the equivalent. It's just a little shorter. But all this is really doing under the hood. This is just a shell script that they put on your computer when you install .NET 10 that calls to this. So this is useful for things like pipelines where maybe you, for instance, if you want to run mutation tests, you've got to run this tool that runs those. You don't actually care if it's on the runner on the machine or not. You just need to do that one-shot run and then get rid of it. This is useful for stuff like that. A .NET tool in general, if you're not familiar with those, all that means is that it's a NuGet package that also comes with a CLI app. So it's a NuGet package, but it's kind of intended to do stuff for you to be run from the command line. So this gives you the ability to just one-shot those. I really like this one. Actually, this is a small thing that I think is super helpful. So I think, so there's a new option on all CLI commands called this -- CLI schema. So as an example, here it is for .NET Clean. All it does is it's what it sounds like. It gives you the schema for that command in a JSON format. So you can see like, oh, here's the arguments. You can give it project or solution. This is what it's for. You can give it artifacts path. This is what it's for. So I think along with the help command for each thing, this is like you almost don't even need to read the docs anymore. I think this is actually pretty slick. Aliases, kind of the same thing. No new commands, but very easy to mess up or not remember some CLI commands the right way. So for instance, if you tried to do .NET package add, that would fail. That's not the right command. It's actually .NET add package. Same thing for like .NET reference add. That would fail because it's actually .NET add reference. So they said, it's kind of annoying. We'll just add aliases so those things actually do work. So a bunch of things that just kind of make the CLI a little easier to work with. Okay, second section, moving on to C#14. These first two slides are actually probably a couple of things I'm most excited about in the .NET 10 release in general. So before, you would have to say, hey, if this object, like if customer is not null, then do whatever, do this thing, do the right side of this assignment. Now you can one-line this with the question mark. You can say customer (.order) equals this, and this will only run if customer is not null. So this was possible with some other things like accessors, but now it's possible with actually assigning stuff where the right side will only run if the left side is not null. So I like that one a lot. And extension members. So I love extension methods. Does anyone use extension methods in here? Yep. So you can currently make extension methods. You can now also make extension properties. So this one here, they're making an is empty on just IEnumerable, where all it does is run source.ini. And you can also make extension static methods. So as a lover of extensions, I think this is pretty amazing, especially making just like basically extend the type itself with static stuff. I think that's super cool. And the field keyword, there is a new keyword in C#14. So Before C# 14, if you wanted in your getter and setter to do something besides just have a no body getter and setter, you had to have this private backing field. So in this setter, they're saying, hey, if the value is null, we're going to throw a null exception here. Now you no longer need that private backing field. There is a field keyword here that does the exact same thing. It's just syntactic sugar. So I do really like this. This is a very common use case. And once you get used to what this field guy is doing, I think it's a lot more readable and a lot more clean. File-based apps. This is pretty cool. It's sort of like C# scripting. It allows you to have like a single C# file, and you can just say .NET run that file name, and it runs like it has its own CS proj, sort of. So it does target ahead of time compilation by default, so you can target specific machines, and you can still reference other C# projects, NuGet packages, or give it a specific SDK with these little preprocessor directives in it. And at the top, we've even got a little shebang, so you can run it on Linux. So in your shell, you would just say .NET run, like whatever the name of the script is, like hello.cs, and you would see this in your console. So under the hood, what this is doing is it is actually generating a CS proj in the files just in a temp folder, and then when it runs, it gets rid of stuff. So you can use this for, if you just want to prove a concept, something that's tiny. I don't want to make a new whole .NET solution for that or a whole new .NET project. And then if it works, you expand it out. Or if you just maybe you just love C#. I don't want to run Bash. I don't want to write PowerShell or whatever. I want to write C#. You can do that. And here's a little more complicated example. We're actually using a minimal API in our file-based app. So you can see here, we're choosing the SDK, which is the .NET Web SDK, and we're even using a NuGet package. We're using Open API, and this will work. That's pretty cool. And this is just the equivalent CS proj that it will generate. So it is a real CS project and everything. You just don't have to do that part yourself, and you lose it when it's done. Okay, moving on to EF Core. We have very small amount of Azure SQL and SQL Server updates. Basically, just they support two new data types, vector and JSON. So JSON kind of speaks for itself. Vector is a lot more popular now with AI. If you kind of know the inner workings of how AI works, there's vectors all over the place. So if you're doing things with that in your database, they now support those fully out of the box. Complex types. Complex types themselves are not new in ND framework. But them supporting optional types is new. So for instance, what you could do already is we have this customer type and we say, hey, it's complex and it's got a shipping and a billing address. What the SQL that will map to, this shipping address and billing address, as you can see, actually have 4 fields in them: city, postal code, street, and street number. And those get mapped out, even though we have 2 things here, they get mapped out to 8 columns on the database because they're complex. So that was possible before. What you can do now is have them be optional. So this will make them, instead of not null, they'll be null, obviously. The only restriction here is that at least one property on your type has to be not nullable. They also support mapping to JSON now to support that support for the JSON column type. So again, here's that shipping address stuff, and you just call to JSON on it. And then in your generated SQL, you get a JSON type column and stored as JSON. So that's pretty neat. Minimal amount of effort. And it also supports structs. Not much to say there. Pretty much what it sounds like. You can use structs instead of classes for your complex types now. Okay, link to SQL translation. I am not going to go super into detail on this because it's actually kind of a long read. You can go and read it if you want, but just know at the time, before this was fixed, it was the most highly voted issue in the official EF Core repo. So the very short explanation is that there is now a new default translation mode when you have parameterized collections getting translated in EF Core. So each value becomes its own scalar parameter instead. So instead of the left, you now get the right. This seems like a pretty small change, but the reason it was the most highly loaded issue in the EF core repo is because when you did this, like all of a sudden your DB server, the CPU went way up and cost you more money, was not good. And this happened to a lot of people, and a lot of people did not like it. And it was finally fixed. So pretty cool. Left join and right join, this is my personal favorite in the EF core updates. It now has first-class support for these things. So you could do it before. I've done this the old way. If you've ever done the old way, it's pretty ugly. You could do left joins, but you had to like chain these link statements together and give them a few bodies, and it was ugly. Now, you just like, they literally have a statement for it. You just call dot left join and give it the things you want, and it just works. Or you can do right join. So I love that. This is one of the other things that I can't believe wasn't there already, but love it. Okay, security. They no longer log inline constants from queries, which is probably a good idea in case that's sensitive information, like a social security number, for instance. Kind of in that same vein, I don't think I've ever used from SQL Raw, but if you are using from SQL Raw and you put a field, if you concatenate it, it's going to give you a compiler warning now. It's just basically like, hey, are you sure you want to do this in a raw query? And you can suppress it if you know what you're doing. You're like, yeah, I know for sure this is sanitized, or like I've verified it. You can suppress that warning, but out of the box now, it is going to give you a warning if you do this. All right, section 4, MAUI WPF and WinForms. Like I said, this section is pretty short just because if you go look at the release notes for these things, there's a bunch of like improved performance, fixed bug fixes here and here, a bunch of tiny little updates. And I'm just not going to go through every little one. So MAUI, lots and lots of changes to a bunch of controls. I think there were like 30 headings on that update page just because of how many controls they updated. Maybe most notable is that it integrates with Aspire now out of the box. You just do the normal add service defaults and it'll work with MAUI. I'll also show Aspire at the end of this. And you can now intercept and respond to web requests from these two things, Blazor WebView and Hybrid WebView. So just this little event handler, kind of how you would normally respond to web requests outside of MAUI. WPF, more of the same, general performance improvements, bug fixes, code cleanup. Fluent styles were added to more stuff. It is not across the board yet, but basically their update is like, hey, we're making progress. Is anyone here using WPF? I'm kind of curious. I don't think I've used WPF in 6 years or so. Okay, I know it's still around. It's not like dead, but I just don't hear about it much anymore. And WPF and WinForms use this same clipboard API now. This is related to 1 or 2 .NET versions ago. I think they deprecated the binary formatter because it's not secure anymore. And this is related to that. WinForms, is anyone still using WinForms? No, okay, I'm kind of surprised actually. I don't think WinForms will ever die. As noted by in .NET 10, it is still getting updates. So bug fixes and code cleanup. I can't believe they didn't get this until until .NET 10, but it's got full async form support now. That is no longer experimental as of .NET 10 in WinForms. Same thing with dark mode. So they also have this new API called screen capture mode. If another app is using the Windows API to take screenshots and you use this, that app will not be able to take, like if you have a form, it'll be blocked out in the screenshot. So if you're trying to hide sensitive fields or something, again, this only works if that other app is using the Windows API, but a nice addition. So probably should be hiding passwords and things anyway, but if you just want to block those fields out just to be safe in screenshots, you can do that as well. Okay. AI in Visual Studio. There weren't a ton of specific AI releases other than like AI being peppered and everything now. But, you know, it's 2026, can't really have a software presentation without talking about AI. So here's that slide. This actually happened in October, 1 month before the .NET 10 release. but they released something called Microsoft Agent Framework. All this is doing is before they had a library called Semantic Kernel, which is for making your own AI agents, and a separate library called AutoGen, which was a library for orchestrating multiple AI agents together. And I think they just kind of said that's confusing, and we're just going to put them in the same library called Microsoft Agent Framework. So that's what they did. I have played with Semantic Kernel a little bit. I think it's pretty slick. It's pretty easy just to POC something and like hook it up to a free Azure OpenAI model and then make a little MCP server for yourself. Pretty neat. And 2026 Insiders, same thing. It came out in October, but I felt like this was notable enough to get a slide. Is anyone using 2026 Insiders? I think 2026 is a pretty big improvement over 2022. I've really been enjoying it. It's got a few new cool things. One is adaptive paste, which is it's the same hotkey. It's just Control V. But when you paste stuff now, sometimes you'll see a little pop-up. It says like, press tab to have Copilot do this thing or something. And the idea is Copilot will see if you pasted something from Stack Overflow and like the parameter names don't match yours, it'll change it so they match yours now. Or if you paste a Python function, it'll refactor that into C# for you. Or maybe you missed a using statement or something. So the idea is it's just paste but smarter. Copilot fixes stuff from that paste that you missed. So hopefully your copy paste pattern from Stack Overflow actually works now. That's pretty cool. They have these 2 new agents in VS Code, and I believe they're working on more actually. So the debugger agent, I'll demo this at the end of the presentation. When your tests fail, you can right click and say like, hey, Copilot, debug this. And it just immediately goes off and starts the test, looks at the failure, and it even fixes it for you of what it thinks the fix is, and then you can try to run it again. And Profiler agent is similar, but for Profile, you can say, hey, like, why is my app using so much memory, or why is it so slow? And it has context of all your logs and like how apps are supposed to run, I guess, and can look through all that stuff and tell you where it thinks the problem is. I saw a tweet from Mads Christensen, who's the like senior PM for Visual Studio, I think yesterday, and he said, Profiler agent, like I just asked it a question, how can I make it more efficient? And it made my app run like 5 times faster with no effort or something. So that's pretty cool. Mermaid chart rendering. VS Code has had this for a while, but Visual Studio has it now too. I'll show that. If you haven't used Mermaid charts yet, I highly recommend it. Basically, it's just text you can check into source control, and it makes a nice little, like, you can zoom in and out, you can pan it. It makes an actual chart for you when you open it up in the preview. Visual Studio now supports that. And code cover. I thought this was kind of a big deal. Code coverage, even in Community Edition, you can use code coverage now. So that used to be, I'm pretty sure, an enterprise-only feature, and it's just free now. And benchmark.net is now included in the project templates. I also think this is a pretty big deal because Scott Hanselman has this blog post that's like, he calls them dark matter devs, where he says, you know, if you're reading this blog post, there's a good chance you are not a dark matter dev, because you might be someone who like goes to user groups, goes to conferences, reads content online about .NET, but 99% of developers are not that. They just go to their job and clock out at 5 and go home to their family, and that's fine. And he calls them dark matter devs because it's like, that's most of them, but you don't see them. They're like invisible. There's no way to find them. And dark matter devs are probably just going to use the stuff that's out of the box. And this is out of the box now. And if you've used benchmark.net before, it's awesome. It's fantastic. It's not new. It's been around for forever. It's just, if you didn't know about it before, there's this easy project template to set up with it now. Okay, ASP.NET Core stuff, including Blazor. This was actually, I couldn't find this in the release notes, but it was in their actual .NET Conf presentation. So before hot reload, as you can see here, this is an example project using Mud Blazor, which is a pretty popular just component UI library for Blazor. Hot reload before was more like maybe lukewarm. I don't even know if to call it a lukewarm reload. Took 38 seconds. And now with Visual Studio 2026, it took 3 seconds. So in my mind, that's still maybe a lukewarm reload. I'd like it to be like, less than a second, but that's pretty big improvement. They did it with Mudblazer, I think, to show like, hey, Mudblazer is not a small library. This is like a pretty big thing, and it can still hot reload pretty fast. Okay, the Blazor script is now served as a static asset instead of being bundled with the ASP.NET Core stuff like it was before. So this is nice because this is just kind of how you're supposed to treat JavaScript files in general. It's easier to cache bus them. It's easier to cache them. It's easier to compress them with like gzip or Brotli, whatever you want to use. And that's just a new slide. Okay, client-side fingerprinting. So .NET 9 introduced server-side fingerprinting for Blazor web apps. For Blazor WebAssembly apps, you can do client-side fingerprinting now. So it has like placeholders in your index.html, and when you build the app, it replaces those things because there's no server. With Blazor standalone WebAssembly app, it just ships by itself. Okay, and these are kind of just general things that I felt like maybe were worth including, but not big enough to deserve a slide of their own. I kind of shoved them all in 2 slides. So they have some new samples for how to do like JOT token stuff with OIDC, intra-ID, Windows authentication. They even show how to do this with the BFF pattern. That's back-end for front-end, not best friends forever. So this is just a common pattern with .NET web apps that you see. You might have like an Angular React front-end or something, and then a .NET back-end for that front-end. So the samples are nice because OIDC, just JOT stuff in general, is kind of a notoriously cryptic subject, I think. And I think a strength of .NET has always been its documentation, like Microsoft Learn and all that. So this just adds to that. And then a new row class attribute on Quick Grid. So this lets you apply a CSS class to a specific row of this grid, just to show tabular data, things like that. And this lets you do it conditionally. So I think that's nice. We'll show this in the Aspire demo. You get some more metrics and tracing in Blazor apps now, like lifecycle and events. If you've seen like passkey stuff pop up on your computer now, whenever you try to type in password, that's web authentication, and ASP.NET Core Identity now supports that. WebAssembly apps, which again means there's a .NET backend, no longer use launch settings.json for the environment. You now put this in this web WASM application environment name. I don't know how I feel about that now because it's like 2 mental models now, depending on which app you're in. I assume it was to avoid confusion with not having the launch settings JSON. Be like, hey, just so you know, you don't have a .NET backend. I assume that's the reasoning behind it. And for minimal APIs, I'm just kind of curious, has anyone used minimal APIs in production? I haven't touched them a whole lot. Okay. So new minimal API stuff. They have validation support. So if you've used like Fluent Validation as a popular third-party library, you can use that stuff with minimal APIs now, basically. So you just do this add validation, and what that looks like on an actual endpoint is they're using an attribute here, which is data annotations. They're not using Fluent Validation, but that makes this fail if it's not an even number, right? And you can put your own little error message in there. Product ID must be even. So before you just couldn't do this on minimal APIs, now you can. You can also do validation with records now, and server sent events are supported. Okay, miscellaneous stuff, kind of the same as the general slides for Blazor. OpenAPI 3.1 is now supported. Not going to go over all the changes, but this was kind of a big change with OpenAPI, and ASP.NET Core supports that now. Again, we'll see this in the Aspire demo, but there's more metrics around auth stuff and identity. If you've ever done integration testing with ASP.NET Core and you use the Web Application Factory, which is kind of like how you host it in your tests, you had to do this annoying thing where program.cs, the program class, is internal by default. So Web Application Factory would be like, oh, I can't access that. So you had to do this little one-liner thing that said public partial program and then empty brackets. And that would make the program accessible from Web Application Factory. You don't have to do that anymore. There's source generators that make that public by default now. So it's just another little annoyance that's not there anymore. This .localhost top-level domain's kind of been a trend that's getting more popular. Instead of having like HTTPS localhost for your running app, you can have like your actual domain .localhost, and ASP.NET of course supports that now. And we have automatic eviction of memory used by the web server. So this is not probably going to be huge gains, but it's another nice thing to save on some memory. In Aspire, which I believe was the last section here. So Aspire is kind of similar to the performance improvements, and that the scroll bar for all the Aspire updates is like this big. So I'm just going to go over a few of them. But one of the big ones is that .NET Aspire, now just Aspire. There's no .NET there anymore. I think one of the reasons for this is because with this release, they also have first-class support for JavaScript and Python with Aspire. So it is still using .NET framework behind the scenes, but if you're a JavaScript or Python person, you're like, well, I don't want to use .NET or install it, then it doesn't sound as bad. That's one reason. I think another reason is Mads Christensen, the Visual Studio guy, had said, we've asked people what they think about C#. And they say, I love it, like modern language, open source, great. And we asked those same people what they think about .NET, and they're like, oh, it sucks. It's just archaic, like, Windows only. So we're kind of trying to move away from the .NET terminology to specifically C# or whatever it is we're actually talking about. So I think that's probably another reason it wasn't called out on here. And they also went from V9 to V13 with this release. The funny part is they did that to avoid confusion, but they did that to decouple themselves from the .NET numbers. So .NET went from 9 to 10. Aspire's always done the same thing every year. I think they kind of said, we want to do more like updates more often than .NET. So we're just going to choose a number that's far enough away that people don't get confused. So they chose 13. So it's on V13 now. There's no 10 or 11 or 12. And like I said, it's got first class, it already had C# support, obviously, but now it has full support for the Python and Java or TypeScript apps. And you can combine your .NET. I think they even have templates for this now out of the box. You can combine your .NET backend with like a React or Angular front end with Aspire now. So if you're not familiar with Aspire in general, I'll do a little demo of it, but kind of the idea of it is that it replaces Docker Compose if you're using that. So if you have like your .NET backend and then like an Angular front end, maybe you have a SQL database too. Aspire is kind of the orchestrator for those things that hooks all of them up without you having to do a bunch of stuff. And probably Docker Compose is a fair chance that's what you would use for that without Aspire. It also gives you a local dashboard. So if you're into this microservices architecture, you can trace events through it and see all the logs in one place. So if you have like 10 microservices that you want to trace this request that went through a bunch of them, you can just do that all from one spot because everything's connected out of the box for you. There's a new CLI. Before you use the .NET CLI, there's now an Aspire CLI. So instead of saying like .NET run, whatever, you say Aspire run. I'm sure this is related to them getting away from the .NET terminology and just being their own standalone thing, no matter what language you're using. Their starter templates are a little cleaner now. Like I said on the Maui slide, they have Maui integration here. I think this is one of the biggest changes, to be honest. They have an MCP server for Aspire now. So you can just ask Copilot like, hey, this request failed, why? And it knows how to access all the MCP, all the Aspire logs, all the telemetry, all that stuff just out of the box in the MCP server. It'll find that stuff for you. So I think that's pretty huge. There's some application map improvements. We'll see that in the demo as well. That just shows a visual map of how your application talks to, all the services talk to each other. And the dashboard, which is not new, is deployed to Azure App Service, or is deployed to Azure by default if you are deploying to Azure App Service. So kind of in general, the idea behind the dashboard is you use it for local development. When you go to prod, you're probably going to use something like Datadog or Honeycomb, one of those things. But maybe, for dev, if you're using Azure App Service anyway, you can get it out there. I think that's pretty slick. Before I go over the coding demo, if you want to look at this stuff yourself, especially if you're using that QR code, that's going to be on the next slide. This first link is just kind of all the updates on .NET 10. The second post, let's actually go look at that in a second. The Stephen Taub post on all the performance stuff. If you really like getting technical, this is no joke. This is probably like a 2 or 3 hour read. If you like getting on the nitty gritty of what was updated, and all the Aspire updates as well, which is going to be a lot. So that's it for the slides part. I'll still show a few things in the coding demo. But again, here's that QR code if anybody wants to access the slides, so that you just super sure don't miss anything. I'll give people a second to get that. You can also follow me on social media from that link. Okay. And let's see if StreamYard likes me here. Okay, so here's the Stephen Taub post, Performance Improvements in .NET. And he does this every year. He makes one of these posts for every version. It's not sharing? Oh, StreamYard. Okay. Okay. So here's the little teeny tiny scroll bar. He's got like benchmark every few paragraphs. Just like, that's crazy in a good way. And you'd think like, oh, probably a lot of that is comments, but like almost none of it is comments. So he does use that benchmark.net for a lot of these. I like that one of the method is called oops. A lot of times somewhere in here, he'll have like, here's what actually changed in the missile, the intermediate language. Anyway, and here's what's new in .NET Aspire. Also quite long, as you can see. So this is the reason I'm kind of calling it the paper cuts release, and the reason I am not going over all that stuff. So, okay. I probably won't go over every little thing in here. I kind of showed these samples in the demo already, I think. What I will do is this hello.cs. This is an example of a file-based app. You zoom in a little more. Here we go. So I'm using this humanizer package, which is kind of a cool open source thing that you can see a few of the things it can do here. So I have this sentence, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, and I use 3 of its little features here. I truncate, I say 3.2 words, and I .humanize on a date time. So I'm just going to run that here. Going to navigate to my repo. I'll say .NET run hello.cs. You can see it is actually building and restoring an actual project. And this is because I'm running it for the first time. But there you go. If you look there, you could see it made something called hello.cs proj. But here's the outputs for my 3 console write lines is the quick brown fox. It truncated 20 characters, 2 words, gave me the word 3, and then 2 hours ago for my date time humanized. So pretty cool. You can just run a C# single file like that. I kind of like that. Here's just an example of the new benchmark template. Here it is. So it makes a program.cs for you. All it is a one-liner that does benchmark runner.run, the program. And then it's got this benchmark file here, which I'm not going to go over the library right now, but it's got a few benchmarks in here. CPU usage diagnoser, and then a benchmark. So pretty cool. You can just get started with it a lot easier that way. I do want to show the debugger agent. So I have a test here that will purposely fail. It's just a real simple calculator class that I think it was the division, I think, that it's doing wrong. So once that fails in the test explorer, or the build error. Well, that's fine too. We're not going to debug that right now. What happens is you can right click on your test down here, whichever one is failing, and it's grayed out because they didn't run. You do this debug with Copilot, and that automatically kicks you over, which is weird because I ran it right before I came here. And this is what it did. It just put this prompt in here for me. It says, help me debug test, and then it puts the test name. And it says, I'll investigate why this is happening. And it ran them for me, and it did suggest a fix. It was like, oh, that's why this is happening. So this is a little contrived because it was such a simple problem. I was like dividing by 0 or something, but pretty cool that that's there out of the box for you. The Aspire demo, I did not change anything with this. This is just an out of the box Aspire template. So you have 3 projects here. You have the web front end, which is Blazor with this template. You have a minimal API backend. And there's nothing tricky going on with these. This is getting fake weather data. It's got a few Git endpoints. And then this third project is the Aspire part, this app host. This kind of does the orchestration part. And it's pretty small, as you can see. So the very first thing we do is do this distributed application.create builder, and that creates the builder that we'll use to hook stuff up. So the first thing we do is add our API project, and we give it a name. The name we give it doesn't matter, but that's how we'll like view it in the logs and use it as an identifier. We give it a health check out of the box at /health. That's pretty cool. Then we add our Blazor front end and with reference API service, and that hooks up our minimal API to it. And then I can just say in the terminal here, I'll say Aspire run, and it'll build it. And once it finishes building, it'll give me a URL that I can go to. And this URL won't be for the app, it'll be for the Aspire dashboard. So I'll go to this, copy that. So here's the Aspire dashboard, and you can see here's my services. And this is kind of how it wires up everything for you. My minimal API, which I called API service, right? That's just the string I gave it. And it even gives you 2 URLs for each one, HTTPS and not HTTPS. So web frontend is my Blazor app. So if I click on that URL, there's my Blazor app. And there's my weather data. So it called a fetch on the API. So I'll see that in the logs now. I can click counter a few times. This is just the default Blazor app in the template. But we can go to console, and we see all our logs in one place, and it tells you which service that's coming from, right? And we can see some more structured logs if we want. Here's what I was talking about on some of the slides, some of the new telemetry stuff. So there's a whole bunch of new metrics and traces for different events in here. So event on click, right? Tells you how long it took. You can trace it to other services if they're coming from that. I'm going to select API service to view metrics. And you probably won't, these get pretty nitty gritty, a lot of them. So you probably won't need them most of the time, or at least a lot of them. But like memory pool, you can see how much memory has been allocated if you want, right? And again, the cool thing about this is this MCP button at the top. I've already done this. This just gives you instructions on how to set up the MCP server. But since I've already done it, I can go to Visual Studio, and it is checked already. So there's Aspire. So you can see the tools it has, like list app hosts, list traces. It's like, what are the events that have happened in my Aspire app? And it's going to recognize I'm asking about Aspire and be like, hey, is it okay if I run these tools? These from the MCP server. So it decided that it needed to run list traces, right? And it got 42 traces, which I'm going to assume is correct. And yeah, I did, in fact, navigate to /counter. And it said it did this stuff. Button click is apparently taking 0 to 2 milliseconds. So no errors detected. All this stuff is correct. So would probably be more, a little more interesting if something actually failed. You'll really get some value out of it. But I think this is pretty freaking cool that you can just do this out of the box and it works across your whole app. So I'll put that's it. I'll put the QR code up once again. And yeah, does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Those temporary cross funds,
Uh-huh.
they get merged straight out of memory, or they get?
Yeah, they get to app data local, I think it is. It's like some weird spot or something.
What concern is, do they just pile up there, or is it just like?
I want to say, you should look it up to verify. I want to say it said it's deleted after it runs, but yeah.
Then, I don't know, real quick, I'm gonna play with this when I get home, but that, string from there, is that result only integers, or can you do floats?
Oh, that's a good question. I assume it would work with floats, but I did not try that. That's a good question. Yeah.
That seems like a perfect use case for currency.
Agreed. Yeah. Anyone else?
So Daniel,
Cool.
is this how you find you, Daniel?
Yeah, you can find me from this. I do have all my social media links. That just takes you to my blog, my .NET blog, and I do have all my social media links on there. So yeah, including the .NET user group, which please join if you have not joined already. Please add me on social media if you enjoyed it. If you thought this sucked and you want to give me feedback and tell me that, add me anyway. That'd be cool. Thank you for coming. Afterwards, we're going to go downstairs to the bar, and like I said, Lean Techniques will pay for drinks if you want them. We're just going to hang out for a little bit. So
Thank you,
Yeah.
Lean Techniques. Thank you, Daniel.
yeah, thanks for overcoming.
Quick little 3-minute presentation.
Yeah.
But if anybody wants to grab drinks, they were having in the fridge. There's a
Yeah.
0 sugar root beer. My wife will thank you for that.
Yeah.
So we got drinks, help yourself. If anyone's going to the bathroom, out that door straight to the left. And I'm just going to do a quick little introduction to DevSA. So it's just in case no one has heard of that. Thank you, Zachariah, in the back for live streaming this. You guys are on the way.
Yeah.
This video that Daniel gave, our Microsoft MVP, was live streamed on our YouTube channel. So if anyone has to zero back and take a look at that, you'll be able to do so. As far as the folks that are here right now, has anyone heard of DevSA? We've got a handful. It's cool. We're about 21, so we're still very new. And I was kind of cracking up because Daniel had mentioned like dark matter. That's kind of clock in.